Homeless dog saves billionaire. Don't eat that. Your wife poisoned it. The autumn rain fell steadily over the bustling streets of Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, where century-old brownstones lined the sidewalks like stern sentinels. Among the hurrying pedestrians and sleek luxury cars, a bedraggled golden retriever named Teddy trudged along, his once lustrous coat now matted and dirty. His ribs showed through his skin, evidence of too many missed meals, and his eyes held the weary resignation of an animal who had known both love and loss. 6 months ago, Teddy had been a beloved family pet, but his elderly owner's passing had left him at the mercy of distant relatives who had promptly surrendered him to a shelter. After weeks in the concrete confines, he had escaped during a thunderstorm, only to find himself navigating the unforgiving urban wilderness of Boston streets. On this particular dreary October morning, Teddy's nose led him to the back entrance of Winston's, an upscale restaurant known for its elaborate Sunday brunches. The smells wafting from the Kit Scarlet were almost overwhelming to his sensitive nose, and his empty stomach cramped painfully. As he cautiously approached the dumpster, hoping to find some scraps, a deep voice startled him. "Well, what do we have here?" Teddy spun around, ready to flee, but something in the man's tone made him pause. Standing in the doorway was a tall, distinguished-looking gentleman in his 70s, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and despite his obvious wealth, his blue eyes held a warmth that reminded Teddy of his former owner. Simon Montgomery III, one of Boston's most successful real estate developers, had just finished his usual Sunday breakfast meeting with his business partners. He had stepped out for some fresh air, feeling suffocated by the increasingly tense conversations about succession planning and his recent marriage to Amelia, his former executive assistant who was 30 years his junior. "You look like you've seen better days, friend," Simon said softly, crouching down despite his expensive suit. He held out his hand, palm up, and waited patiently. Teddy's tail gave a tentative wag. There was something about this human that felt safe, despite all the reasons his street-learned wariness told him to run. Simon noticed the faint outline of where a collar had once been, and the intelligent, albeit wary, look in the dog's eyes. "You're not a street dog by birth, are you? Someone taught you manners once upon a time." Teddy took a cautious step forward, his nose twitching as he caught the scent of bacon lingering on Simon's clothes. The old man smiled and slowly reached into his pocket, pulling out a paper napkin containing the remains of his breakfast bacon. "Here you go, boy. You look like you could use this more than I do." The kindness in that simple gesture broke something open in Teddy's heart. He accepted the offering gently, his tail wagging with more enthusiasm now. Simon watched the dog eat, noting how he took the food carefully despite his obvious hunger. Definitely someone's pet once. "Sir." A young waiter had appeared in the doorway. "Your wife is on the phone. She says it's urgent." Simon sighed, the warmth in his eyes dimming slightly. "Tell her I'll call her back shortly." He turned to Teddy, who had finished the bacon and was looking at him with hopeful eyes. "What do you say, boy? Would you like to come home with me? I've got a big empty house that could use some life in it." Teddy's tail thumped against the wet pavement. Something in him recognized a kindred spirit, another soul in need of genuine companionship. "Well, first things first," Simon said, standing up with a slight grunt. "We need to get you cleaned up and checked out by a vet." He turned to the waiter. "James, would you mind calling my driver? And see if you can find a rope or something we can use as a temporary leash." Within the hour, Teddy found himself in the back of a luxurious black Mercedes, his wet fur leaving marks on the leather seats that Simon dismissed with a wave of his hand. They stopped first at a veterinary clinic where, despite it being Sunday, Simon's influence and generous payment secured immediate attention. The vet, Dr. Scarlett, gave Teddy a thorough examination. Apart from being undernourished and having some minor skin issues from living on the streets, he's in remarkably good health, she reported. He's about 5 years old, neutered, and despite his recent hardships, his teeth suggest he was well cared for most of his life. He's also microchipped. Simon's face lit up at this news, but fell again when Dr. Scarlett continued, "Unfortunately, when I ran the chip number, I found that his original owner passed away 6 months ago. The owner's family surrendered him to a shelter, from which he escaped. Technically, he's considered abandoned property now." "Their loss is my gain," Simon said firmly, scratching behind Teddy's ears. "Let's get him up to date on all his shots and whatever else he needs." 2 hours later, Teddy had been vaccinated, dewormed, and thoroughly bathed. His matted fur had been carefully groomed, revealing the beautiful golden coat underneath. Simon also purchased a handsome leather collar and leash, along with premium dog food and various supplies recommended by Dr. Scarlett. As they drove through the iron gates of Simon's Beacon Hill mansion, Teddy pressed his nose against the window, taking in the sight of the sprawling property. The house itself was a magnificent Victorian structure, meticulously maintained but somehow lacking the warmth such a grand home should possess. "Welcome home, boy," Simon said as they walked up the front steps. "I think you'll find." "Simon? Is that you?" A woman's voice called from inside. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all morning." Amelia Montgomery appeared in the doorway, her perfectly made-up face showing a mixture of concern and irritation. She was striking, with long dark hair and green eyes, dressed in designer casual wear that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her expression froze when she saw Teddy. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. "This is Teddy," Simon replied, his tone gentle but firm. "He needed a home, and I've decided to give him one." Amelia's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. "Darling, you can't be serious. That's a huge responsibility. And what about my allergies?" "You told me your allergies were only to cats," Simon reminded her, moving past her into the house. "And I think some responsibility would do me good. Keep me young." Teddy followed Simon closely, but his eyes remained fixed on Amelia. There was something about her that made his fur stand on end, a coldness that her carefully constructed smile couldn't quite hide. "But the furniture, the carpets," Amelia protested, trailing after them. "Can all be cleaned or replaced," Simon said firmly. "I've made up my mind, dear. Now, I'm going to show Teddy around and then take him for a walk in the garden. Would you like to join us?" "I have a headache," Amelia replied stiffly. "I think I'll lie down." As she climbed the grand staircase, Teddy watched her go, a low whine building in his throat. Simon patted his head reassuringly, but Teddy couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong in this beautiful house. Over the next few weeks, Teddy settled into life at the Montgomery mansion. Simon proved to be a wonderful companion, taking Teddy for long walks in the expansive gardens, sharing quiet evenings in his study, and even letting him sleep on the plush rug beside his bed. The old man seemed to come alive with Teddy around, laughing more, walking straighter, and spending less time buried in his work. But while Simon flourished, Amelia grew increasingly distant and irritable. Teddy often caught her watching him with calculating eyes, and he noticed how her smile never quite reached those eyes when she spoke to Simon. He also observed her frequent private phone calls, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever someone entered the room. One morning, about a month after Teddy's arrival, he was dozing in Simon's study while the old man worked on some papers. Amelia entered, carrying a cup of coffee. "You've been working so hard, darling," she said, placing the cup on his desk. "I thought you might need this." Simon looked up with a distracted smile. "Thank you, dear. I'm just finishing up some changes to my will." Teddy's ears perked up at the sudden tension in Amelia's voice. "Oh? What sort of changes?" "Well, for one thing, I'm setting up a substantial trust for animal welfare organizations," Simon replied, missing the flash of anger that crossed his wife's face. "Teddy has reminded me how much joy animals bring to our lives. And of course, I'm ensuring he'll be well cared for no matter what happens to me." "How thoughtful," Amelia said, her fingers tightening on the back of Simon's chair. "Will you be done soon? Cook wanted to know if you'll be joining me for lunch." "I'll be there shortly," Simon assured her, reaching for the coffee cup. Teddy had been watching this exchange intently, and something about Amelia's behavior set off alarm bells in his mind. As Simon's hand moved toward the cup, Teddy suddenly launched himself forward, knocking the cup off the desk. The coffee splashed across the expensive carpet. "Teddy!" Simon exclaimed, surprised but not angry. "What's gotten into you? That mutt is destroying everything." Amelia snapped. "I'll get you fresh coffee." But Teddy wasn't finished. He grabbed Simon's sleeve gently but firmly in his teeth, pulling him away from the desk, trying to convey his urgency. "He needs to go out," Simon said, interpreting Teddy's behavior in his own way. "I could use a break anyway. Would you have someone clean this up, dear?" As Simon and Teddy walked in the garden, the dog remained unusually alert, staying closer than ever to his master. Something about that coffee had smelled wrong to his sensitive nose, a bitter undertone that shouldn't have been there. That evening, Teddy lay awake long after Simon had gone to bed, his ears pricked for any unusual sounds. Around midnight, he heard the soft click of a phone being dialed from somewhere in the house. It didn't work, Amelia's whispered voice carried through the heating vent. That damn dog. No, we can't try again right away. It would be too suspicious. I know how much money is at stake. Listen, just give me time to handle this. Yes, once Simon is gone, everything will be ours. Teddy's growl was too quiet for human ears, but his resolution was set. He would not let anything happen to Simon. Over the next few days, Teddy became Simon's constant shadow, refusing to let the old man eat or drink anything that Amelia had touched. His behavior didn't go unnoticed. I think Teddy needs to see a veterinarian, Amelia suggested one evening. He's becoming quite aggressive with food. He might be sick. Nonsense, Simon replied, watching as Teddy calmly accepted a treat from his hand. He's perfectly gentle. He's just protective. Of course he is, darling, Amelia said smoothly. Still, I've made an appointment with a specialist for tomorrow. I'm concerned about his behavior. That night, Teddy heard more whispered phone calls, caught fragments about taking care of the dog problem, and a specialist who knows what to do. He knew he had to act. The next morning, when Amelia came to collect him for the vet appointment, Teddy was ready. As soon as she opened the front door, he bolted past her, barking loudly enough to wake the neighborhood. But instead of running away, he circled back to the garden, where he knew Simon took his morning walk. Simon was indeed there, reading the morning paper on his favorite bench. Teddy ran to him, barking insistently, then ran toward the garden shed, looking back to make sure Simon was following. "What is it, boy?" Simon asked, intrigued by Teddy's obvious urgency. "What are you trying to show me?" Teddy led him to the shed and scratched at a section of loose siding. Simon, curious now, pulled the siding away, and found a small stack of papers hidden inside. They were receipts for various purchases, untraceable phones, offshore bank account information, and most damning of all, receipts for purchases of certain chemicals that had no legitimate household use. As Simon read through the papers, his face grew pale. "Simon." Amelia's voice called from the house. "Is everything all right? Did you find that crazy dog?" "Everything's fine, dear," Simon called back, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "Just getting some air." To Teddy, he whispered, "Good boy. Good boy." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Simon made some discreet phone calls of his own, and by that evening, private investigators and police officers had quietly surrounded the property. They caught Amelia in the middle of another late-night phone call to her accomplice, who turned out to be her real husband, a man with a long history of insurance fraud and elderly exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had Amelia been planning to poison Simon, but she and her real husband had pulled similar schemes before, using different aliases. They had never been caught because their previous victims had died before anyone could prove foul play. In the aftermath of Amelia's arrest, Simon spent a long evening in his study, Teddy's head resting on his knee. "You know, boy," he said softly, "I've spent my whole life building things. Buildings, businesses, fortunes. But I never built what really matters. Genuine relationships, trust, love. I was so lonely I let myself be fooled by a pretty face and empty words." He scratched behind Teddy's ears. "But you showed me what real loyalty looks like. You saved my life, and not just from poison. You saved me from my own loneliness." Teddy thumped his tail against the floor, looking up at Simon with complete devotion. "I've been thinking," Simon continued. "This house is too big for just the two of us. What do you say we use some of that money I was going to leave to charity right now instead? We could build the best animal sanctuary Boston has ever seen. Give other animals like you a second chance at happiness." Teddy's enthusiastic bark made Simon laugh, a full hearty laugh that echoed through the house that no longer felt empty. 1 year later, the Montgomery Teddy Animal Sanctuary opened its doors. The state-of-the-art facility, built on a portion of Simon's estate, quickly became known as one of the most successful rescue operations in New England. Simon, with Teddy always by his side, could often be found there, welcoming new arrivals or helping match pets with potential adopters. The sanctuary's logo, a golden retriever with a hero's cape, made some visitors laugh, but those who knew the story understood. It was a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes come with 4 legs and a wagging tail, and that the purest hearts can be found in those who ask for nothing but love in return. Simon and Teddy spent their days surrounded by the joy of animals finding new homes and people finding new companions. The loneliness that had once plagued them both was replaced by a purpose greater than themselves, and their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Every evening, they would walk together in the garden where Teddy had exposed Amelia's plot. Simon would often pause at the old bench and say, "You know, Teddy, some people might say I'm just a foolish old man who got lucky with a clever dog. But I know better. You chose to trust me that day in the rain, just as I chose to trust you. And that choice changed both our lives." Teddy would wag his tail and press closer to Simon's leg, his eyes saying what words couldn't, that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism begin with a simple act of kindness, and that the truest wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the love we give and receive. As for Simon, he never remarried. He found that the companionship of his four-legged friend and the fulfillment of helping other animals in need filled his heart completely. He updated his will one final time, leaving the bulk of his fortune to maintain the sanctuary and establish similar facilities across the country. The story of the homeless dog who saved a billionaire became something of an urban legend in Boston, told and retold in different ways. But for Simon and Teddy, it wasn't about the drama or the headlines. It was about two souls who found each other when they needed it most, proving that sometimes the most perfect families aren't the ones we're born into or marry into, but the ones we choose with our hearts. And on quiet evenings, as the sun set over the sanctuary and the sounds of happy animals filled the air, anyone watching would see an elderly man and his golden retriever sitting contentedly on their favorite garden bench, two unlikely heroes who had learned that the greatest wealth isn't stored in bank vaults but in the unwavering trust between human and their faithful companion. As years passed, the Montgomery Teddy Animal Sanctuary became more than just a shelter. It became a symbol of hope and second chances. Simon established a program where elderly people could come and spend time with the animals, understanding firsthand how Teddy had transformed his own life. He also created a special fund to help senior citizens keep their pets by covering veterinary costs and pet food expenses, ensuring that no elderly person would have to give up their beloved companion due to financial constraints. The sanctuary also partnered with local schools, bringing in children to learn about animal care and responsibility. Teddy, despite growing a bit gray around the muzzle himself, remained the star attraction. He had a particular gentleness with children, letting them pet him and tell him their secrets, somehow knowing that some of them needed a friend just as much as he once had. Simon never forgot that rainy day behind Winston's restaurant. Every year on the anniversary of finding Teddy, he would host a special dinner for the homeless and their pets, providing food, veterinary care, and assistance in finding housing that would accept animals. No one should have to choose between having a roof over their head and keeping their best friend, he would say. The sanctuary's success caught the attention of national media, and soon similar facilities began opening across the country, all following the Montgomery Teddy model of comprehensive care and community involvement. Simon was invited to speak at conferences and universities, always with Teddy by his side, sharing their story of trust, loyalty, and the transformative power of compassion. As Teddy entered his senior years, he slowed down a bit but never lost his protective instincts toward Simon. He still insisted on checking Simon's food, though now it was more habit than necessity. Simon would laugh and say, "Still looking out for me, old friend? Some habits die hard, don't they?" Their morning walks became shorter but no less cherished. They would stroll through the sanctuary grounds, greeting the animals and staff, both moving a bit more slowly but with the contentment of those who know they're exactly where they're meant to be. One crisp autumn morning, much like the day they first met, Simon sat with Teddy in their garden, watching the sunrise. "You know, Teddy," he said softly, "I used to think my legacy would be the buildings I built or the deals I made. But now I know better. My real legacy is sitting right here beside me, and in every animal that finds a home through our sanctuary, and in every life we touch together." Teddy rested his graying head on Simon's knee, his brown eyes still full of the same love and loyalty they had shown on that first day. They had both been lost souls when they found each other, Simon trapped in his lonely wealth, Teddy abandoned on the streets. Together, they had built something far greater than either could have achieved alone. The story of Simon Montgomery and his heroic dog Teddy became more than just a tale of foiled criminal plots and saved fortunes. It became a reminder that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as challenges, and that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the depth of the bonds we forge and the lives we touch. In the years that followed, countless families found their own versions of happiness through the sanctuary's gates. Each adoption was a new chapter in the ongoing story that began with one act of kindness between a lonely billionaire and a homeless dog. And while not every rescue dog would save their owner from a poisoning attempt, each one had the potential to save someone from something equally dangerous: the poverty of a life without love. Simon and Teddy's legacy lived on in every wagging tail, every purring cat, and every smile of a new pet owner leaving the sanctuary. They had proven that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. They can only be given freely, like the trust of a dog for his human, and the love of a human for his dog. And so, their story became not just about a rescue, but about the endless ripples of kindness that flow from one simple act of compassion. In saving each other, they had created a wave of hope that would continue to touch lives long after their own story had become legend. For in the end, it wasn't just about a homeless dog saving a billionaire. It was about two souls saving each other, and in doing so, creating a legacy of love that would continue to change lives for generations to come.